She built his empire. He gave his heart to someone else. Now she's coming back, not for love, but for revenge. When Peter Rayford chose love over loyalty, Stella, his brilliant, betrayed former assistant, didn't break. She calculated. She waited. Then she struck. From boardroom sabotage to whispered scandals, Stella launches a silent war to dismantle the life Peter and Mirabelle built. But when the ashes settle, she's forced to confront the one enemy she never planned to face. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The hum of the city pulsed beneath Stella's feet, but inside the glass-paneled apartment that overlooked Central Park, all was still. Too still. She sat curled on a velvet chair in the corner of the living room, her legs tucked underneath her, one hand cradling a glass of wine, the other holding a sleek tablet. The apartment, rented in haste 2 weeks after Peter exposed her, was sterile, modern, expensive. Much like she used to be. She hadn't slept much. The bags beneath her eyes were barely covered by the concealer she'd carelessly smudged on before stepping out for coffee that morning, only to return and sink back into this chair like she never left. She opened the tablet again. It was still there, the article that had sent the final blade into her chest. Inside the empire of Peter Rayford, how love, loyalty, and a former maid shaped a new legacy. The photo was perfectly composed. Peter stood smiling, his arm around Mirabelle, who wore a simple navy dress and no makeup. She looked radiant, effortlessly warm. There was something in Peter's expression that Stella had never seen when she stood beside him for 5 years. Peace. Not gratitude. Not obligation. Not even admiration. Just quiet, wholehearted peace. Stella threw the tablet onto the couch, barely resisting the urge to scream. She had been everything to Peter. His brain, his shield, his back-channel operator. She had managed acquisitions, handled press fires, and even arranged therapy when he hit burnout 3 years ago. When he snapped at board members, she covered for him. When he couldn't sleep, she adjusted his entire calendar. When he broke down behind closed doors after his father's death, she was the only one who saw it. And now, replaced. With a maid. A girl who used to wipe Stella's office desk. Her teeth clenched, jaw tight with fury she hadn't yet named. It wasn't that Peter hadn't loved her. Stella had long ago stopped believing in fairy tales. But he had respected her. Or so she thought. The humiliation of that dinner still echoed in her bones. His voice calm and cruel. You weren't investing in us. You were investing in your exit strategy. She had given him her years. Her best years. Her career. And he discarded her like bad PR. Stella rose slowly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling window. The skyline glittered with unapologetic wealth. She knew every building by name, every CEO who held a penthouse within them. She had shaken hands with all of them. Wined them. Outwitted most. But Peter? He had blindsided her. Not by choosing someone else, but by underestimating her. That she couldn't forgive. She picked up her phone and opened a message thread she hadn't touched in over a year. Dominic Weller. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Dominic was an old contact, CEO of Veltrix Corp., Peter's most aggressive competitor. They once sat across a negotiation table that Peter walked away from, calling Dominic's offer predatory and primitive. She remembered the insult. Dominic never forgot it either. Stella typed, "Are you still interested in Peter Rayford's downfall?" 3 dots. A pause. Then, "Meet me. 9 p.m. No handlers." Stella stared at the message for a second before locking her screen. The decision didn't thrill her. It didn't feel like some glorious triumph. It felt necessary, like closing a wound that no longer wanted to heal. She walked into the bathroom, washed her face, and reapplied lipstick. She changed into something sharp, something that looked like power, even if she no longer had any. In the mirror, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. This wasn't the woman who used to walk into investor meetings like she owned the room. This wasn't the woman who once held the ear of one of the most powerful men in tech. This was a woman with something to prove, and no limits left to respect. Her phone buzzed. A second message from Dominic. "I'll bring the wine. You bring the knife." She slipped the phone into her clutch. Tonight wasn't about closure. It was about fire. She would burn the empire they built together to the ground, and watch from the ashes as he realized what he gave up. And maybe, just maybe, when the smoke cleared, he'd understand who really built it to begin with. Stella had always believed the most dangerous weapons were not the loudest. They were quiet. They looked like good intentions. Kind emails. Simple rumors. Legal gray areas. Like raindrops on a rooftop. Harmless until the leak is too big to ignore. And she had become very, very good at rain. She made the first call from an encrypted line at 2:17 a.m., sipping espresso in the back corner of a low-lit co-working space, surrounded by strangers who thought she was just another startup founder. Her contact, Everett Lynn, a cybersecurity mercenary with no conscience and even less loyalty. "Everett," she said coolly, "I need eyes inside the Rayford system. Not deep. Just enough to track movement, launch dates, internal memos, marketing timelines." "You used to work for him," Everett said. "What changed?" "I stopped being useful," she replied. "Now I'd like to return the favor." He didn't argue. The pay was good. She gave him 3 days. By the time the fourth morning rolled around, Stella was already moving on to phase 2, the foundation. Mirabelle's foundation had become the darling of community grant circles. Humble, authentic, growing fast. Too fast. Stella didn't target it directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, she posed as a potential donor, Marina Blake, philanthropist and former oil heiress. She even created a false LinkedIn profile, complete with staged photos and a fabricated nonprofit based in Luxembourg. She emailed the foundation's public contact form. "Dear Mirabelle Rayford and team, I'm interested in becoming a partner donor for your education program. However, before I make a large contribution, I'd like to better understand your fund allocation. Specifically, what percentage of donations go toward administrative costs versus direct community support? Transparency is everything in this space." "Marina." The tone was polished, professional. Just enough to sow a seed of doubt if it leaked. The very next morning, she submitted an anonymous complaint to a watchdog site accusing the foundation of inappropriate financial management and nepotistic hiring. She included a screenshot of Mirabelle's employment history, highlighting the jump from Maid to co-founder. She didn't need to prove the claims. She only needed someone else to ask the question. Back at the Rayford estate, Mirabelle was seated at the long dining table, sorting thank you letters from school children. Part of the new Pen Pal program her foundation launched for foster youth. Peter entered quietly, holding a printout. "Mirabelle, we've had 3 board members email this morning asking about some anonymous allegations." She looked up, confused. "What kind of allegations?" "That the foundation is being used to launder money through personal hiring. That you've funneled resources without oversight. They even dragged your past into it." Her face dropped, pale and suddenly small. "I've never taken a single dollar for myself," she said, voice low. "I track every expense. Every meal, every toothbrush we give the kids, every volunteer hour. Everything is logged." "I know," Peter said, crouching beside her. "I trust you." "Then why do they think?" "Because someone wants them to doubt you. And doubt spreads faster than truth." He stood and kissed her forehead, but something lingered in his eyes. A trace of paranoia. Something Stella had counted on. The next morning, Stella attended a private brunch hosted by Dominic Weller, surrounded by half a dozen VCs who still remembered the time Peter called them sharks with no purpose. Stella wore ivory. Simple. Sharp. She sipped from a crystal flute and leaned in when she spoke. "I'm not saying Peter's falling apart," she said with a smile. "But when someone like him starts outsourcing vision to his wife, the foundation starts to crack." The table chuckled politely. "Besides," she added, "he's always been a bit unstable. Smart, yes. But emotional. It wasn't the lie that mattered. It was the framing. Every word she spoke wasn't meant to destroy, just to erode. Back at Rayford Innovations HQ, Peter noticed something else. One of his engineers accidentally forwarded him an old marketing concept, one that wasn't scheduled for public release until Q1 next year. The same concept was now being used by Veltrix Corp. in their latest ad campaign. Coincidence? No. It was too exact. He paced his office, gripping his phone, then pressed a button. James, he said to his head of security. I want a full sweep. Our servers. Our comms. Our internal devices. Somebody's leaking intel. You think it's an internal breach? James asked. I don't know yet, Peter said. But in his gut, he did. Only a handful of people had known about that campaign. Only one had helped design it from the ground up. Stella. Still, he hesitated. She was gone. Out of the system. She shouldn't have access anymore. He didn't know that Stella had never fully left. She had kept a backdoor login hidden in a development branch buried under meaningless code names. Peter didn't see it. James didn't either. But Stella? She was inside the walls. Watching. Waiting. Listening. Back at home, Mirabelle's foundation team gathered for an emergency call. One of their partners had pulled funding, pending clarification of public reports. Mirabelle kept her face still. Calm. Measured. But when the call ended, she leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to breathe. She's trying to ruin me, she said quietly. Peter didn't ask who. He already knew. Mirabelle, he said, gently touching her arm. She's not after you. She's after me. You're just where she knows I'll feel it the most. Mirabelle looked at him. Then we fight together. Peter nodded. No noise. No press. Not yet. But she's in the shadows. Then we pull her into the light. Back in her apartment, Stella sat in the dark, watching as news broke of irregularities at Rayford Foundation. Nothing conclusive. Just whispers. She wasn't smiling. Not quite. But something in her chest buzzed with vindication. I told you, she whispered to herself. You should never have underestimated me. She didn't know it yet. But Mirabelle wasn't the same woman she once was. And this time, she wasn't going to clean up someone else's mess. She was going to protect what she built, with love, with fire, and with truth. And that truth was coming. It started with a glitch. A minor delay in Peter's internal product launch timeline. One of the back-end servers had failed a deployment script, halting their proprietary AI prototype, a project codenamed Eris, still 6 months from being unveiled publicly. Run it again, Peter said, leaning over his lead developer's desk. It's a permissions issue. But when they did, the result was the same. Access denied. His stomach tightened. This wasn't a technical failure. It was a lockout. Across town, in the glass tower of Veltrix Corp., Stella sat in a corner office that Dominic Weller had offered her without hesitation. Her desk faced the skyline, deliberately mirroring the 6 EW she once had at Rayford Innovations. But unlike her old office, this one felt cold. Strategic. Like everything about Dominic. I have the announcement scheduled for tomorrow, Dominic said as he stepped inside, tossing a manila folder onto her desk. We're calling it Veltrix Vision. It's a watered-down knockoff of Rayford's AI, but flashy enough to fool investors. Stella opened the folder. Diagrams. Graphics. Code excerpts she recognized. Some lifted directly from the confidential architecture she had helped Peter create during long nights fueled by black coffee and ambition. They'll know it's a copy, she said. Dominic shrugged. Of course they will. But I don't care. By the time they prove it, we'll have secured the partnerships. Peter moves carefully. I move first. She closed the folder and looked out the window. He was right, and that scared her more than it should have. Back at Rayford Innovations, Peter called an emergency board meeting. 12 executives joined virtually. One by one, faces appeared on the wall of the sleek conference room, each bearing some variation of confusion, concern, or worse, disappointment. We've lost a competitive edge, said Carla White, head of investor relations. The Veltrix launch undercuts our entire Q2 strategy. They're using our language, added one of the marketing leads. Even the UX design mirrors what we presented in our internal draft last month. Peter folded his arms, staring at the static image of the Veltrix homepage now glowing from the screen. Introducing Veltrix Vision, real-time AI for safer cities and smarter homes. It was almost word for word from a pitch deck Peter had prepared but never published. Someone leaked it, he said flatly. Who? Another board member asked. Your internal access logs show no breach. It wasn't a breach, he replied. It was someone who still knew how to hide in our system. Mirabelle, seated quietly at the edge of the room, spoke for the first time. It was Stella. The room fell silent. Someone coughed. Carla frowned. That's a serious accusation. She was his assistant for 5 years, Mirabelle said, calmly but firmly. She helped build this. She knows where everything lives. She had motive, and now she has opportunity. Peter didn't deny it. He couldn't. He had trusted Stella more than anyone, maybe even more than himself. And now, he was watching her burn down the house they built together. Later that night, Mirabelle stood beside him in the study. The rain outside pressed against the windows like fingers, persistent and cold. She's not going to stop, Mirabelle said. I know. She wants to ruin you. Peter nodded slowly. And it's working. He moved to the liquor cabinet and poured a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink it. Just held it. I underestimated her, he admitted. She's always been sharp. But this isn't ambition anymore. This is rage. She's angry at you for choosing me, Mirabelle said. No, he replied. She's angry at me for choosing honesty. For showing her that no matter how much she achieved, if her intentions were corrupt, she'd never win. Mirabelle looked at him. Then don't let her win. He met her gaze. Steady. Silent. Then he finally took a sip. The next morning, Stella stood at the head of a Veltrix strategy meeting, watching as Dominic unveiled the first live demo of their AI assistant. The software was functional, the code clean enough, but it lacked soul. It lacked what she and Peter once fought to build, purpose. Still, the crowd clapped. Investors nodded. Stock tickers climbed. And Stella smiled carefully, politely. But inside, something hollow opened. Dominic leaned toward her and whispered, Now we just keep pressing. You'll be CTO before the year ends. She nodded, but her chest didn't swell with pride. Only pressure, because for all her victory, Peter hadn't collapsed. Not yet. And Mirabelle? She wasn't breaking either. She was fighting back, with grace, not revenge. Stella hated it. Hated how steady Mirabelle looked in every press appearance. How confidently she answered questions. How the foundation began recovering through community support and grassroots campaigns. Mirabelle wasn't hiding. She was rising. And that scared Stella more than anything, because it meant she hadn't broken the right person. 2 weeks later, Peter and Mirabelle released a joint statement. We stand behind the integrity of our work and our mission. Rayford Innovations has not and will never sacrifice ethics for profit. We are aware of the imitations and distractions. But our focus remains on building, not branding. On people, not just platforms. It went viral within hours. But more than that, it resonated. Because Peter and Mirabelle didn't just have a product. They had trust. And in a world drowning in noise, trust echoed louder than sabotage. That night, Stella watched the statement on her phone. She was alone in her office. Again, she didn't say anything. Didn't throw her phone. Didn't cry. She just stared at the glowing screen until it went black. And for the first time since this all began, the thought hit her. What if I've already lost, and I just haven't admitted it yet? But pride has a voice. And hers said, Not yet. The neighborhood was nothing like Manhattan. Here, the air smelled like fried dough and car oil. Fences leaned like old men. Children played on cracked sidewalks in front of houses held together by hope and duct tape. No Teslas. No private elevators. Just life, the hard, unfiltered kind. Mirabelle stepped out of the Uber, hugging her coat tighter against the wind. She glanced at the address scribbled on the note Peter had helped her find. 313 Levitt Street. The building in front of her was modest, a converted duplex, faded green paint peeling at the edges. A small mailbox near the door read, Ari Rivers. She knocked. No answer at first. Then the door creaked open, revealing a young woman in jeans and a faded hoodie, barefoot, holding a toddler on her hip. She had Stella's eyes, same sharpness, same fire, but there was a weariness behind them that Mirabelle recognized instantly. Can I help you? The woman asked. Mirabelle smiled gently. You're Ariel, right? Ari's body stiffened. I'm Mirabelle. I used to work with your sister. Used to? Ariel asked, shifting the toddler to her other hip. It's a long story, Mirabelle said. But I was hoping we could talk. Just for a few minutes. Ariel looked her up and down. Perfect posture, pressed coat, soft-spoken, but saw no threat. She stepped aside. Come in. The inside of the apartment was clean but worn. A few mismatched chairs, a second-hand couch, a television mounted crookedly. A faint smell of cinnamon and formula lingered in the air. Ariel sat across from Mirabelle, offering no coffee, no pretense, just silence. Mirabelle didn't take long. I believe your sister is trying to destroy my life. Ariel didn't blink. I believe that too. Mirabelle tilted her head. You're not surprised. Nope. A beat of quiet. She ever talk about me? Ari asked. Mirabelle shook her head. Not once. Ari laughed bitterly. That checks out. She set the toddler down with a toy on the carpet, then looked back at Mirabelle. You want to understand her? I'll tell you. But I'm not telling you to make you feel bad for her. I'm telling you so you'll see the whole picture before you draw your lines in the sand. Mirabelle nodded. And Ari began. Stella was born in survival. Their father was a ghost, barely there even when he was in the room. Their mother worked 2 jobs and still came home with hands that shook from exhaustion. Stella took control early. By the time she was 11, she was walking Ariel to school, cooking dinner, fixing broken cabinet doors with duct tape. She wasn't just the big sister. She was the shield. She never played, Ari said. Never had friends. Never dated. She didn't laugh. Mirabelle imagined the steel-eyed woman who used to walk the halls of Rayford Innovations in 6-inch heels. The same woman who knew every board member's birthday, but never once accepted a hug. She started winning scholarships. Internships. Got out of here like a bullet out of a gun. But she didn't look back? Mirabelle asked. Oh, she looked, Ari said. But she thought if she slowed down, she'd drown. She sent money. Every month. Paid off Mom's medical bills. Paid my tuition, even when I dropped out. Mirabelle listened closely. She told me once, Ari continued, I'm not allowed to break down. That's not my luxury. Mirabelle felt her breath catch. The words sounded like something she could have said in another life. She gave everything to people who never gave her a thing back, Ari said. So when she finally got to the top, working with your husband, she probably thought, finally, I'm safe. Mirabelle nodded slowly. But then, Ari added, you happened. Mirabelle looked up. I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean, here comes this woman, not from Harvard, not from boardrooms, but from under the same ceilings she cleaned. And you got what she killed herself trying to earn. Mirabelle lowered her eyes. She thinks I took her place. She thinks, Ari said, you were given her place. Without the blood. The silence that followed was heavy. I'm not justifying what she's doing, Ari said. She's gone too far. But I know Stella. She doesn't want to destroy you. She wants to prove that Peter never really valued her. Because if he did, he wouldn't have replaced her with you. Mirabelle swallowed. I didn't replace her. No, Ari agreed. But that's how pain talks. And pain's the only voice she listens to now. Mirabelle stood slowly. Thank you for telling me this. Ariel walked her to the door. Don't make the mistake of fighting her like she's a villain. She's not evil. She's just lost. Mirabelle looked at her. And what do lost people need? Ariel exhaled. Not revenge. Just a reason to come home. Later that night, Mirabelle sat in her reading chair while Peter reviewed documents across the room. She looked at him. He was still focused but tired. Not physically, but soul-tired. "I want to speak to her," Mirabelle said. Peter looked up. "To Stella." Mirabelle nodded. He hesitated. "Why?" "Because I don't want to destroy her. I want to understand what she's trying to protect." Peter set his pen down. "She's trying to protect the version of herself that never got held," Mirabelle said. "The one who fought so hard to matter that she doesn't know how to stop fighting, even when the war's over." He didn't argue. Instead, he crossed the room, knelt beside her chair, and took her hands. "She'll try to hurt you again," he warned. "She already has," Mirabelle whispered. "But maybe the only way to end this is not to fight back. Maybe it's to remind her what she once was." Across the city, Stella stood alone in an elevator lobby, staring at her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back at her looked powerful, impeccable, but inside, she felt like glass held together by posture and lipstick. Her phone buzzed. New email from Mirabelle Rayford. "I'd like to meet you. Not as enemies. Not as rivals. Just as women with unfinished stories." Stella stared at the screen. Her fingers trembled. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Not rage. Not pride. But fear. The kind that comes when someone sees you, and not just the armor you wear. She didn't reply. But she didn't delete it either. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy. Stella stood alone in her condo, staring at a legal document she didn't remember authorizing. Yet there it was, bearing her digital signature. A non-compete clause she had overlooked, buried deep in her final employment contract with Rayford Innovations. A clause that now rendered every action she'd taken with Veltrix not just unethical, but illegal. And Dominic Weller had known. He had known when she walked into his office. He had known when he fed her the poisoned gift of power. Now, she was the one holding the knife, but the blade was pointed at her own throat. 3 hours earlier, Peter had received a call from his legal team. "Sir, a former associate, Stella Rivers, has violated her termination agreement. The product released by Veltrix, we have reason to believe it contains not just similar architecture, but code lifted directly from our private repositories." Peter didn't flinch. He had waited for this. "What's our play?" his head of legal asked. "Public exposure. But with control," Peter said calmly. "No lawsuits. No mudslinging. I want our integrity louder than their imitation." He turned to Mirabelle, who stood near the window, arms folded. "She'll be watching," he added. "She's expecting us to retaliate." Mirabelle looked at him. "Then let's do the one thing she doesn't expect." That afternoon, a press conference was held in the community center that bore Mirabelle's name, not a corporate boardroom. No LED screens. No stock updates. Just folding chairs, a microphone, and a wall covered in paintings by the children their foundation served. Peter stood beside Mirabelle in a black blazer, sleeves rolled, no tie. "I'm not here to accuse," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "I'm here to remind the world that the foundation of any empire isn't its technology or its valuation, it's its values." He gestured to Mirabelle. "And when you try to destroy something built on truth and service, what you really reveal is your own reflection." He paused. "And for those who've tried to dismantle this with secrets, leaks, and sabotage, I offer not vengeance, but mercy. Because I've learned something from the woman standing next to me." He looked at Mirabelle, eyes soft. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is forgive what you'll never forget." Across the city, in her penthouse, no longer dim, but dark, Stella watched the broadcast on her tablet. The wine in her glass was untouched. The silence in the room was suffocating. Not because she was being exposed. Peter hadn't said her name once. But because he had done the very thing she could never prepare for. He had extended a hand, instead of striking her down. He had forgiven her publicly. And suddenly, the collapse didn't feel like justice. It felt like grief. That night, Dominic Weller called her. "Your contract breach is going public. You didn't tell me you had a non-compete. You knew, she said coldly. There was a pause. I gave you a chance to hit back. You missed. Click. The call ended. Stella stood in the silence. No job. No leverage. No allies. No armor. And still, the worst part wasn't the loss. It was that Peter didn't hate her. Because if he had, she'd have had something to hold on to. But now, there was nothing left but her own reflection. And for the first time in years, she looked at it without excuses. She saw herself. Not the brand. Not the strategist. Just Stella Rivers, a woman who had everything to win, and chose war instead of healing. Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor. No screams. No tears. Just a soft, broken whisper. What have I done? Stella didn't sleep that night. Not because she was angry. Not because she was plotting. But because, for the first time in years, there was no mask left to hold in place. She sat on the cold tile floor of her kitchen, barefoot, back against the cabinet, wrapped in an old sweatshirt that smelled faintly of lavender and loss. The city glowed around her, alive and uncaring. And she finally let herself feel it all. The pride, the betrayal, the aching, deep loneliness of knowing you were once so close to being seen, and instead chose to be feared. There was no press release for that. No investor pitch. No applause. Just a woman and her regrets, sitting in silence. By morning, she had made a decision. Not to fix it. Not to win. But to stop pretending she hadn't already lost something far more valuable than a company or a title. She had lost herself. And now, she wanted to find what was left. She didn't call Peter. She didn't write to Mirabelle. Instead, she searched through her encrypted accounts and accessed a long-forgotten fund she had kept under the name Alyssa King, her mother's maiden name, a name no one had heard her speak in over a decade. It was a shadow account. Quiet. Untouched. Built over time with bonuses, freelance consulting, and discretionary gifts from boardroom alliances. It was supposed to be her freedom fund, her way out if she ever needed to disappear. Instead, she transferred the full balance, $200,000, to the Rayford Children's Initiative, Mirabelle's latest expansion program for youth shelters and orphan communities. She wrote no name, no message, just one line in the memo field. For those still becoming. Mirabelle saw the donation 2 days later, while reviewing the quarterly ledger on a quiet afternoon. The numbers stopped her. The note made her heart still. She didn't say anything immediately. Not to Peter. Not to her team. Just sat with it. She read the words again. For those still becoming. And she understood. The following evening, Mirabelle attended a local youth arts showcase, an event she'd helped sponsor. It was small. No cameras. No press. Just joy in its rawest form. Children laughing, music echoing through cracked speakers, handmade paintings hung on clotheslines between trees. And at the edge of it all, standing just beyond the lights, was a figure in black. No heels. No suit. No lipstick. Just Stella. She hadn't been invited. She hadn't RSVP'd. She hadn't intended to stay. But when Mirabelle turned and met her eyes across the lawn, neither of them flinched. Stella didn't smile. Mirabelle didn't wave. But a moment passed between them, a silent current of recognition, too complex for language, too sacred for explanation. They had both been women trying to hold on to something they couldn't name. Now they were simply standing in the same place, unarmed. Stella gave a small nod, barely emotion, and turned to leave. But Mirabelle took a step forward. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say I forgive you. She just whispered, just loud enough to carry on the wind. You're not alone anymore. Stella paused. She didn't turn around. But she stayed a moment longer before walking off into the dark. A week later, in a neighborhood far from the towers of Manhattan, a new sign was nailed above the door of a small converted office space. The Still Becoming Project, a financial literacy initiative for girls. Inside, a table with only 4 chairs. A whiteboard with a messy to-do list. And Stella Rivers, no longer the woman who ran boardrooms, but a woman who finally belonged to herself. She didn't take selfies. She didn't make announcements. She just opened the door that day, greeted 3 teenage girls from a nearby shelter, and said, "Let's begin."
Thank you so much for listening to this story at Folklore Chronicles stories. And please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, kindly click on the subscribe button, turn on the notification so when I post more stories like this, you'll be the first to get them. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your support and I do not take it for granted at all. Until I see you in my next video. Bye.